Howdy, folks, and welcome to Moose Podcast 212. Thanks so much for stopping on by. I am truly grateful. Had some great correspondence and Zoom chats this last week. So I'm here. If you need help, have questions, keep shooting them at me, and I'll do my best to get them answered. I want to thank my good friends at Bedford Camera, bedfords.com, as they keep continuing to support the Moose Podcast and my crazy photography ideas. So make sure when you go and make that purchase via the website, bedfords.com, or via the phone, make sure you get that Moose discount, M-O-O-S-E. It will save you real money. And of course, they've got a lot of the new stuff that's coming in, including the Z14-24, the Z7200-28. So it's bedfords.com. Thank you guys for your continuing sponsorship. Let's get right down to this week's topic, the awe factor. There is a new paper that came out this past week on research. As you might guess, there's a lot of things going on out there when it comes to seeing how things are with the current pandemic and people's response to it, looking at what is changing. I mean, a lot of things for critters. There's a lot of critters that are having a really good time, bouncing back a bit because they don't have so much human pressure. But human pressure, when it comes to inside our head, it's kind of hitting an all-time high. And this paper was kind of interesting. How to sit there and physically become physically better, how to be mentally more stable, and how to keep your emotions in check during this stressful time. This research showed that if you just took a 15-minute walk each day, that's all, 15-minute walk, in which you introduced yourself and you found something that just awestruck you, that would totally change and modify and brighten your world. Now you think about it, that's really not a whole lot. 15-minute walk, be awestruck. Now, that awestruck, the awe factor, isn't that kind of what we try to do as photographers? Now, I remember all too clearly the very first time I went off to do my first air-to-air photo mission. Went to an airport in Carson City, walked into this hangar, and the door opens, the lights come on, and here are four beautiful T6 Texans sitting there, and a big albatross tucked in the corner, and a real gregarious, happy, very talented pilot said, "Come on in." And we sat there and didn't sat there. We walked around and we looked at these aircraft and told a story about each one of them. The checkered pattern on the cowling and the different naming and the numbers, how they're part of the Reno Air race scene. Then we went up these stairs because it's a big hangar because it had an albatross. I mean, it's a big amphibian aircraft. We went up these stairs, went into the office to sit there and do our brief for the air-to-air photo mission. And I distinctly remember going up these stairs, turning around and looking at these aircraft, realizing that I was about to work with them, and the awe factor that came from that. And I have absolutely no doubt that awe that struck me at that moment, the awe factor, completely translated into my photography that came from that air-to-air shoot. And I was reading this paper that came out last week about it, and I'm like, well, now that somebody's connected the dots for me, like this is like obvious stuff. But as photographers, it might not be that obvious. Now we go to different locations, the edge of the Grand Canyon, the middle of a beautiful forest in fall color, out to the seashore. I mean, the list is endless. And often we're awestruck. Right? And then connecting the dots in the camera, sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's not, because we're awestruck by what we take in, but not what we have captured. that leads us to many different things. How can we sit there and kind of bridge the gap between that feeling of awestruck that we have, what we see in the camera, and probably what I think is the most important part is grabbing that heartstrings of the viewer photograph and making them awestruck by our photograph. Thinking this through more and more, and then looking at Instagram feed for the past week, some of the comments that people make, and they'll say about a photograph, oh, that's gorgeous or fantastic. And I look at the picture, I'm like, they're looking at something different than I am. That's what I'm thinking. And then perhaps I'm thinking wrong. Perhaps I just don't know that the person who's making that comment is awestruck because in their own day-to-day life, they're not seeing that moment that that person is presenting on Instagram. So where could that lead us as photographers? It could lead us to perhaps not trying to be perfectionists, perhaps not being so hard on ourselves to sit there and come up with that perfect photograph if we happen to know our audience. So that's one way in which we could take this research about just 15 minutes and finding awe and applying it to our photography and the people we're reaching out to. But what if you want to up your game? You want that awe to be even more awe-inspiring. Well, then you're going to have to connect a few more dots between you, the photographer, you, the person, and that awe moment, and the camera, which could also mean getting involved with the computer. So when you get to a spot, whatever it happens to be, photographing a coin collection, a critter, a landscape, a person, there is a moment in which, as you're futzing and mumbling and feeling confident, and you got everything going, that all of a sudden you go, oh, that's it. And it clicks in your head. Doesn't necessarily click in the camera. That disparity between those two moments are ones you need to sit there and at all possible analyze, figure out what it is, and then connect those dots for yourself. I was doing a Zoom chat this past week to a couple, and one of them was about exposure. And they were asking a number of questions. They had obviously read much that was out there and had explored it a bit for themselves. Were looking at Adobe Camera Raw and what they shot, how it was being related to. And point blank said, you know, you Moose, you talk about a number of things about exposure, but you always say exposure equals emotion. And of course, emotion's a big part of what? Awe. So one of the things that is a challenge as a photographer is to look at the light. And 99% of the time, it's not so much the subject, but the way the light is playing off and around and showcasing and pulling our eye into that subject that made us make the click in the first place. It's that light. Now, are we doing justice to that light? First of all, on a technical level, which is where it all starts, but it can't end there. And then are we working that light on an emotional level? So when we have that final photograph for the world in which we're going to share it with, do they feel the same awe that we felt at the point of capture? Now, this brings back to a couple things. One, if what you're seeing in the viewfinder isn't that awe you're feeling, maybe you shouldn't go click in the first place. Speaking just for myself, when it comes to being back at the computer and looking at those photographs, there are photographs that I look at them and I go, whoa, I missed the mark. that moment that I felt out there is not in front of me. You never see those photographs. There are other photographs that I recognize as just being that gorgeous moment, and I awestruck, and that euphoria comes over me, but I know it's not a photograph. Be it the ambient air, the breeze, the company I'm with, all those different factors which you cannot incorporate in a photograph, just make that photograph dead. So there is that huge void that we kind of have to sit there and work around in this process of finding that photograph with the awe that goes out and reaches people. Now, I often do a little, you could say, research projects and the things that I post out there. And I post some images with a real purpose. Yeah, I tell a story behind the photograph because I think that's important. It helps fill in the blank for those who see a photograph of mine, and if they so desire to went out and emulate that and capture that same things, and I'm quite honored by that idea. But at the same time, I also want to see their reactions. And so I'm always quite illuminated by looking at the comments that people put out. And it seems that half the time they're complimentary, half the time they're kind of self-doubting, as in they really like the photograph, but they don't think they'll ever be able to do it themselves. Why is that? Now, some opportunities I have before me, I'm real fortunate to have there. Others, they're available to all of us. So I think some of these folks feel like they're not going to be able to get the photograph because they think their photographic skills aren't up to that moment. But perhaps it's not photographic skills per se. Perhaps it's the emotional challenge. What if before you went and you started your shooting, as a study suggests, and you go for a walk for 15 minutes and get awestruck, can that influence your entire shoot? Now, I'm really fortunate here at the ranch. Sharon and I we actually can be awestruck and entertained by the critters that come around, and that I know translates into much more productivity for myself. Can that work for you? And awestruck doesn't have to be something as big and glorious as a sunrise or a sunset or aircraft. It can be a very small little thing. Some of you, I know, one of you is a brand new parent. You might go in and see that little guy come back and smile at you. And boy, that's an awestruck moment. And that could set you off on an incredibly glorious day just with that smile. So it's that little thing and not the big thing that perhaps could change the way you look at your photography, take those photographs, the way you decide to finish the photograph, and perhaps the ones you tend to share. I mean, I would assume, and you know what happens and what they say about assuming, that you took that photograph for a reason, and it wasn't one that was to rain on everybody's parade. It was to elevate their day because it elevated yours. So if you think about those thoughts, you might A, take fewer quantity, but B, better quality photographs that C, are awestruck to you and to your audience, that then grab heartstrings. And that's really what storytelling visually with photographs is all about. So the awe factor, it plays into every part of photography that you might not have thought about, but hopefully you consider that now. It might be more important to you than that f-stop or that histogram or that new lens. You folks take care out there, stay safe, and remember to make every click your story.